In the headlines, the U.S. Federal Reserve is ending its multi-billion-dollar quantitative easing program, but says it's keeping its near-zero interest rate for some time. Rival party chiefs address the country, with the ruling party focusing on reviving the Korean economy, while the opposition focuses on winning support for a constitutional revision. And we analyze the future of inter-Korean dynamics, with high-level talks proposed today canceled. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the newscast. Coming to you live from Seoul, I am Kang Chery. The U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to end its 6-year-long bond buying program, quantitative easing. As for its interest rate policy, the Fed says it's keeping the rates near zero for a considerable period of time. A rate hike was expected to cause massive capital outflows from Korea. Kim Min-ji tells us more.
It's official. The Federal Reserve has called time on the quantitative easing stimulus program it started in 2008 during the global financial crisis. The widely expected decision came at the end of a 2-day meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee in Washington. In a statement released Wednesday, the Fed said there has been a substantial improvement in the outlook for the labor market, and the broader economy has grown stronger. The Fed also expressed confidence the gradual economic recovery in the U.S. will continue despite a global economic slowdown. With the focus on achieving maximum employment, the U.S. Central Bank said it will maintain the 0% to 0.25% target range for interest rates for what it called a considerable time. It added that a rate hike could take place if the committee sees progress towards its employment and inflation objectives. However, experts point out that uncertainties will linger because of the vagueness in the term used by the Fed.
Perhaps until the December meeting, we are going to see this enhanced volatility, because now there's going to be speculation about what are they going to change the considerable time language to. Once they give us a little bit more guidance and specificity with that, it could actually tamp down some of the market volatility because there will be less guesswork involved.
At its highest point, the central bank was pumping $85 billion a month into the financial system. It started cutting back on the program in increments last year as the economy steadily picked up. Since the program's introduction, the Fed has made more than $4 trillion in bond purchases. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Corporate Korea didn't do so well in the first half of this year. Sales numbers of 1,700 companies surveyed by the Bank of Korea dropped for the first time since 2009, right after the financial crisis. The biggest drop came from the electronics and shipbuilding sectors. And a good case in point is Samsung Electronics. It's disappointed the market with a big slump in earnings from its mobile division in the third quarter of this year, taking a hit from Apple's new iPhones and Chinese smartphone makers. Samsung says it's adopting changes in its smartphone lineup. Shin Se-min reports.
Samsung Electronics come out with a damage report from its slowing mobile business. According to its final earnings report from Thursday, its third quarter profits came in at $4.4 billion, down a whopping 60% from a year earlier. It's also the lowest quarterly profit since the second quarter of 2012. The mobile sector led the losses. Its reported operating profits of $1.6 billion, a dramatic drop from the over $6 billion in the same period last year. Analysts estimate shipments of some 80 million handset devices in the third quarter, a drop from the over 88 million a year before. The decline is indicative of the diminishing popularity of Samsung's flagship smartphones. Industry watchers say a combination of Apple's new iPhone launch and more affordable smartphones from its Chinese competitors is taking away Samsung's mobile business. And its domestic rival LG Electronics, number 3 player in the field, is also threatening Samsung on the back of its flagship G3 smartphone. Looking ahead to the fourth quarter, though, Samsung says its performance will likely improve thanks to year-end shopping season. And moving forward further to next year, the tech giant says it's focusing on product differentiation through flexible displays and metal frames while streamlining its strategic models to enhance cost competitiveness. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And staying on the earnings front, quite a different story, though, for Korea's Google, Naver. It's posted an operating profit of around $180 million in the third quarter, up almost 90% on year. The solid growth momentum comes despite a drop in local sales, as the company's mobile messenger line has made a successful global launch that pushed up overseas sales by over 50% to around $220 million. Accounting for 1/3 of Naver's total sales. The pulse of economic outlook among Korean manufacturers is not looking so good. This despite fiscal and monetary policies aimed at breathing life into the Korean economy. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
Business sentiment in Korea's manufacturing sector has dropped to the year's low this month, despite government efforts to boost economic growth. An official from the Bank of Korea attributes the decline to economic uncertainties, largely stemming from China and the Eurozone and the fluctuation of the Korean currency. The low business sentiment is being reflected in the real economy as well. Industrial output recorded negative growth for the second straight month, declining nearly 1% in September from the previous month. And companies are not expecting the situation to improve anytime soon. In a survey of 125 chief executive officers in Korea, more than 90% of respondents said they expected the business climate next year to be similar or worse compared to this year. Less than 9% of the respondents said the Korean economy would be better next year. A lack of new growth engines was cited as the biggest concern, and a majority of those surveys said they plan to focus more on improving their financial stability than on expanding their business. The government says its utmost priority is revitalizing the Korean economy. President Park Geun-hye, in her parliamentary address on Wednesday, said that the government would increase its budget by $19 billion next year to spur growth. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye has vowed to foster Korea's defense industry as the central part of her vision of a creative economy that converges IT with other sectors for economic growth. At a ceremony marking the deployment of Korea's homegrown FA-50 fighter jet, she said the combat plane is a good example of that, expected to create some 27,000 jobs and have a ripple effect of $7 billion. The president also added the fighter jets will help the Korean military enhance its operational capabilities. The FA-50 is capable of carrying up to 4.5 tons of precision-guided missiles and launching strikes under the cover of darkness thanks to its night vision imaging systems. And moving on to Korea's political front, the leaders of rival parties have agreed that the domestic economy is at a crucial point that will decide whether the pace of recovery speeds up or falls into a low-growth trap. But still, they have very different ideas about how to tackle these issues at hand. Ji Myung-gil has more.
Speaking before a full assembly, the chairman of the ruling Saenuri Party, Kim Moo-sung, said Korea's economy was slipping into recession.
South Korea's economic growth rate for each quarter has been below the 1% level, which signals that the economy is not recovering. The economy expanded just 0.9% in the third quarter.
Kim proposed a three-headed attack to address the problems head-on. He called on labor, management, and the government to work together to restrain wage increases, to endorse flexibility in the labor market, and to reform pension programs. The ruling party leader also called for deregulation and promoting the service industry to create new jobs and find new growth engines. However, the interim leader of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy took a different tack.
The world is implementing policies to reduce government debt and stimulate consumer-based growth. At first, consumer-based growth was the government's first priority, but now the main focus is on expanding investment.
Moon said fueling growth means increasing household earnings that can lead to more consumer spending. He opposed giving tax breaks for conglomerates, saying they only hold on to their cash reserves, which cuts the money flow to households and in turn weakens consumption. While both party leaders differ on the details, they do agree that the domestic economy is reaching a crossroads that will determine whether it makes a leap forward or falls into recession. Regarding North Korean affairs, the interim chief of the opposition stressed the need for dialogue and called for lifting sanctions on the North, claiming it was the biggest obstacle to improving inter-Korean ties. The ruling party chief made no mention of North Korean matters in his speech. Kim Young-gyun, Arirang News.
The Seoul Defense Dialogue is underway with senior defense officials from across the Asia-Pacific region sharing their thoughts on and expertise on security matters. And given the venue, of course, it's no surprise that North Korea was a popular talking point. Kim Hyun-bin tells us more.
North Korea's balancing act between provocation and intent has never been as apparent as in recent weeks, with rounds of dialogue followed by cross-border shootouts. To better deal with the North Korea threat, senior defense officials and security experts from 24 countries, including the U.S., Japan, China, and Russia, are here in Seoul to take part in the third Seoul Defense Dialogue, hosted by the Ministry of National Defense. The three-day event, which runs through Friday, serves as a venue to enhance military trust and cooperation among nations in the Asia-Pacific, so they can better deal with security issues in the region.
Through earnest discussions between nations, we will try to resolve not only the Asia-Pacific region's conflicts, but also the world's through enhanced cooperation. I'm looking forward to the many key ideas that will be addressed here.
Reunification, military confidence building, and defense cooperation topped Thursday's agenda. Representatives from the United Nations, the European Union, and NATO were also on hand to provide insights.
That no region is alike, no countries are alike, and so what worked in one region may not work in another region. But it doesn't hurt to look at other regions to say what actually did work. Where do we have hotlines? Where do we have advanced notification of maneuvers, for example? That is something that is not endemic to one region, but that's really endemic to something that could be a military cooperation. And that is something that we can learn from each other and that we can copy from each other.
The Seoul Defense Dialogue not only builds trust among countries in the Asia-Pacific region, it also creates consensus on the need for the unification of the Korean Peninsula. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Mark Lippert, Washington's newly appointed ambassador to South Korea, has arrived at Incheon International Airport a few hours ago and held his very first press briefing in his post. He said he's looking forward to working in South Korea and called the U.S.-South Korea relationship a very special one based on common values. He worked as the Chief of Staff for Defense Chief Chuck Hagel and is now the youngest ever U.S. ambassador to South Korea. Lippert is scheduled to begin his first official workday by presenting his credentials at the Foreign Ministry on Friday and meeting with Korea's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se. The inter-Korean high-level talks slated for today have been scrapped, calling into question North Korea's sincerity towards dialogue. But as our Hwang Sung-hee tells us, there is still hope the two Koreas will talk things out before the end of this year.
The much-anticipated high-level talks did not happen Thursday, and instead the two Koreas remained wide apart. Both sides had agreed to hold the meeting sometime between late October and early November, upon a surprise visit to the South by a high-level North Korean delegation earlier this month. Despite the latest overtures, experts say the trip was Pyongyang's extension of an olive branch.
From North Korea's stance, the three officials were dispatched with the aim of improving inter-Korean ties and at the same time ensuring that the relationship is led by North Korea.
North Korea says it will not show up to the talks unless South Korea bans activists from launching anti-Pyongyang leaflets across the border. South Korea says it has no legal grounds to ban the activities of civic groups. While prospects for the second round of high-level talks remain cloudy, experts say that North Korea will not walk away completely. This as Pyongyang needs Seoul to end its international isolation and prop up its crippled economy. Trips around the globe by senior North Korean officials, including Foreign Minister Lee Soo-young's rare attendance at the United Nations General Assembly, had all proven unsuccessful.
Solve it. So they have only South Korea. That's a gateway for North Korea to get out of that. And also, maybe they have opened up the certain special economic zones. Maybe they want the South Korea's investment. So that's.
While the tug of war between the two Koreas is not expected to end anytime soon, most experts say both parties will want to talk things out within this year. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
A young Army conscript has been sentenced to 45 years behind bars for bullying a junior ranking soldier to death back in April. A Korean military court says the Army sergeant is bearing responsibility for the death of his 23-year-old comrade who was killed by repeated blows to his chest. The court's ruling, however, is far more lenient than what Army prosecutors were seeking, the death penalty. 5 other soldiers who took part in the bullying were also sentenced this Tuesday as well, with 3 of them getting between 25 to 30 years in prison. Many artists attempt to bring awareness to Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women during wartime while creating an opportunity for victims to heal. Today marks the opening of a film that shares the story of one of those victims. Im Yoon-hee tells us more.
Kim spent most of her life in China. Now she's an old woman, but she's hiding a dark secret in her past. A secret about how she was taken from her home in Korea and ended up in a foreign country all by herself. Kim was a sex slave taken by Japanese soldiers during the war, and she flashes back to her treacherous journey in the movie Tuning Fork.
The issue of the sex slave grandmas is something everyone should know about, so this movie was created upon profound meaning.
Kim is played by actress Eo Ki, and her younger counterpart played by Yoo. And though it's been decades since the end of the war, Kim is still stuck in China. She's desperate to get back to Korea, and the pain of her past is driving both her and her granddaughter, played by actress Cho An, to the limits.
In order to prevent such a tragic aspect of Korea's history from repeating itself, I thought about how I have to portray this so people will never forget.
The sexual slavery of Korean women by Japanese soldiers during the war has been a prominent issue in society, appearing on books, on the silver screen, and all over the internet. Even short animated movies like Her Story, which tells of one grandmother's encounter with sexual slavery, brings the issue to awareness. It's movies like these and Tuning Fork that shed light on a dark past in hopes of healing the former victims and also to make sure it never happens again. Im Yoon-hee, Arirang News.
하나만 올렸는데 다른 것도 진동하지?
An American nurse who treated Ebola patients in West Africa is challenging the U.S. state of Maine after being forced into quarantine against her will. To tell us more about the story and more, Paul Lee is joining us from the News Center. Paul, this health worker has taken her fight to the national and even international stage. So what's her next move?
Well, on Wednesday, Casey Hickox gave state officials a firm ultimatum: either lift her mandatory quarantine by the end of Thursday, or else she would disregard the restrictions and take the issue to court. The 33-year-old nurse, though testing negative for the Ebola virus, was placed in isolation upon her return from Sierra Leone, a move that she claims is a violation of her civil liberties. Police and state officials have been dispatched to ensure she complies, setting the stage for a potential showdown.
It is not my intention to put anyone at risk in this community. We have been in negotiations all day with the state of Maine and tried to resolve this amicably, but they will not allow me to leave my house and have any interaction with the public even though I am completely healthy and symptom-free.
At the White House, President Obama had sharply criticized the strict quarantine policies and travel bans that some states have imposed due to the Ebola scare.
And turning to Sri Lanka this time, as search and rescue operations have resumed following a massive landslide there that tore through the country. So what's the latest on the ground?
Well, search efforts resumed Thursday morning at a tea plantation in central Sri Lanka after days of heavy monsoon rain unleashed devastating mudslides. The country's disaster management minister said more than 100 people are believed to be trapped under the mud, while other figures have put the total up to 500. Officials say there's little or no hope of finding survivors at this point, but hundreds of military troops and civilians are still continuing to dig through the debris. Local reports say an area of about 2 kilometers was affected by the landslide, burying some 140 houses.
And shifting now to the financial world, a new international report says the number of billionaires worldwide has more than doubled in the wake of the global financial crisis 6 years ago. So there's been a huge push towards recovery post-2008. So tell me, what's the problem with this picture?
Well, getting one's economy back on track is one thing, but this report from Oxfam found that only the wealthy minority were taking an ever-increasing share of the gains, creating this huge spectrum of inequality. The report released on Wednesday said the ranks of the super-rich joining the Billionaires Club grew to over 1,600 at the start of this year. Oxfam describes the situation as one of the biggest socioeconomic challenges of our time.
But what's interesting is that Credit Suisse put out some data showing what's happened since the financial crisis in terms of the gap between the wealthiest and the poorest. And they showed that the inequality, so that gap, was kind of starting to narrow a little bit before the financial crisis. And since then, the number of billionaires has actually doubled, more than doubled since the financial crisis. And you've still got 1 billion people living in extreme poverty. And that's the kind of situation that we think is unacceptable.
The development charity group called on governments and global bodies to take action to reverse the trend, like closing tax loopholes, raising minimum wages, as well as providing free education and health care.
And finally, Microsoft has unveiled a new smartwatch device as part of its latest push into digital health and fitness. So there's been a flood of smart wearable devices this past month alone. So what sets this one apart?
Well, Microsoft's latest gadget will focus on tracking 2 key biometrics in your life: exercise and sleep. The company hopes that this move will help it stand out of the crowd and give it a head start before Apple releases its own smartwatch early next year. Aptly named Microsoft Band, the high-tech wearable can sense your heart rate, GPS distance, and even your level of stress. It'll run on a single charge for up to 2 days and work across iOS, Google Android, and Windows mobile devices. It's already available in the United States, but no word yet on an international release date. Chery?
All right, thank you so much, Paul, for those updates, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours.
Happy Thursday, everyone. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with weather updates. It was a rather cloudy day here in Korea due to a low-pressure trough approaching from China, and currently rain is falling in parts of Jeju, which will gradually spread it nationwide. So those of you in both Jeollado provinces and Jeju can expect about 20 to 60 millimeters, while 10 to 40 will fall in parts of Seoul and both Chungcheong provinces. A heads up for those of you down south, as tomorrow's showers may be accompanied by stormy conditions and strong winds. Other than that, tomorrow's morning lows will jump a couple of degrees higher than the seasonal average. Looking ahead, some unwelcomed news for baseball fans, as the showers will last through this Sunday. On to Friday's readings. Seoul and Busan hit 18, Daegu reaches 15, Gwangju hits 17. On to other regions, Jeju makes it to 21, Dokdo 18, Mount Kumgang 11. That's all the updates I have for you now, and we leave you with the international weather.
And that will do it for this edition of Arirang News. Thanks for watching.